So with everything going on, clients are asking me, hey, Ryan, are there great deals to be had right now? And I say, kind of. Certainly the pandemic, the lockdowns, the devastation on the economy has been felt by the commercial real estate industry. But like I always say, landlords don't typically make long-term decisions over short-term crises. However, they are changing some of the lease terms to try and deal with this huge loss of demand in office, retail, really all across the board, even multifamily. So let's check it out here. Amid pandemic, Washington area landlords are shortening term lengths to secure tenants. CoStar data shows average term lengths have shrunk since March as owners and property managers prioritize occupancy over long-term commitments. So certainly prioritizing occupancy, some money's better than no money, but also you don't want to be in a situation where you're locking in a below market rate for a very long lease term. So that was what I was referring to before. Disruptions caused by the coronavirus pandemic have naturally affected commercial and multifamily real estate differently, but a common theme is emerging across property types in the Washington, D.C. area. According to CoStar data and supported by anecdotal evidence gathered from local market experts, occupancy and income preservation are being prioritized during the public health crisis, while lease term duration is shrinking. That indicates owners and property managers are willing to sacrifice the security of long-term commitments for short-term gains. Yes, also they can't get people to sign up for long-term because no one knows what the heck is going to happen, and probably not going to know what's going to happen until after the election. So people just aren't making decisions now. So landlords are just trying to get people in and trying to stop the bleeding. So let's see. Term and occupancy are critical. Marissa Michnick, Vice President of Retail Leasing at Bethesda-based Broad Street Realty, told CoStar, owners want to get longer terms, but they know they need to be flexible right now. Certainly. Since March, a review of commercial leases signed in the Washington area shows that the average lease duration is well under 5 years. Out of over 1,200 confirmed lease comps that contained a term, less than 5% had a starting length over 10 years, and nearly as many tenants signed for 1 year as did for 5. In the year preceding the pandemic, the average lease term was roughly 6 months longer. More telling, perhaps, is that 5-year terms outpaced 1-year deals by more than 2 to 1. So this reminds me of when I started in the industry in 2008 and would get calls asking if a landlord would accept a 6-month term. This is quite depressing. I don't want to go back to 2008. I was quite enjoying the economy of 2019. Pretty much anyone will attest that it was probably the best year of their career. Certainly in commercial real estate it was. Summer's generally a slow time, but it was just gangbusters last summer and it was fantastic. So everyone was just kind of hit by this, and landlords are trying to scramble to adjust. Michnick, who works across Washington, Maryland, and Virginia, said this lease term flexibility extends beyond term length and into all things rent related. Amortized or waived back owed rent, common area maintenance reconciliations, percentage of sales splits, and expansive tenant improvement packages are all in play. So tenant improvement packages have been in play. If you read my article last week on the DC Metro office market, a lot of these tenant improvement packages, free rent, substantially and significantly lower the net effective rent that a tenant's paying. And rising construction costs are a big part of that. Just upgraded office build outs and the need to, I guess, have the nicest, newest space to attract tenants, because while the economy was good, people are rethinking office space and we got a lot of supply. So landlords have had to compete to attract tenants. Waive back rent. I've seen landlords offer a month of free rent, 2 months of half rent for an extra year of term. Not really a good deal, especially because that rent's going to be elevated or rather escalated in that last year of the lease term. But let's see what else. Common area maintenance reconciliations, depending on the square footage, it's not that big of a deal. Percentage of sales splits. Okay, well, if you're closed, if you're shut down like a retail business, what sales are there? So these compromises are born out of practicality as much as loyalty. I don't really think there's loyalty. If fear of missing out is trending in the stock market, real estate developers and the lenders who back them are increasingly experiencing fear of the other side. Noel Sharbaugh, managing director of real estate at Greystar Mid-Atlantic, said the company quickly saw the landscape changing this spring, proactively communicating with residents as the health crisis unfolded. Greystar realized that part of its commitment to resident satisfaction meant reworking leases or not collecting rent and then moving out. Greystar saw an increase in renters that either delayed move-outs, selected short-term lease options, or decided to go month to month, said Sharbaugh, who oversees roughly 27,000 units across dozens of properties spanning from Virginia Beach to north of Baltimore. Renters are weighing personal, work, and transportation considerations before making long-term lease decisions. Yes, and also how much would you have liked to have been on the 20th floor of an apartment building in April and having to go out to walk your dog and have to be in an elevator with other people, not knowing if you're going to get sick? Probably not a great thing. The National Apartment Association and the Institute of Real Estate Management have been surveying landlords throughout the pandemic to gauge its impact on the rental market. In September, the survey found that 1/3 of landlords executed lease renewals shorter than 12 months. Okay. The number of properties offering concessions and the dollar amount of those freebies is also on the rise, and outright asking rent drops are widespread in Washington as they are across the country. Rents dropped by almost 3% year over year as the third quarter ended. So that's kind of been happening, and I touched on this in an article last year that I wrote about the Class A multifamily market. It's called The Boom and then the Doom. I will create a link to it in the description below. But they overbuilt, and the next new property to deliver is offering 2 months free when the other one was offering 1, and someone moves from X building to Y just to get those extra 2 months of rent. So basically the landlords are cannibalizing themselves by having to offer these concessions because tenants can just go from one to the other. So let's see. Conversations with other brokers have shined a light on the sheer logistical inertia that stands in the way of clearing out struggling or non-cooperative tenants. Eviction and foreclosure processes are costly and disruptive in regular times and much less unprecedented ones. Even if court dates can be secured, premises reclaimed, or assets liquidated, there's no guarantee that what comes next will be a better outcome. Yeah, TOPA laws, DC, it's a nightmare. Certainly local jurisdictions, seemingly along partisan lines, are just forgiving rent. And the issue with that is that landlords also have loans. So think of their loan to the bank when they bought this property as their rent, and no one's forgiving that. So it's just a big mess. And yeah, in DC, it's damn near impossible to evict someone. So let's say you lease to someone, they stop paying rent day one, it takes 6 months to get them out, and then there was a 6-month stay on evictions. So your whole year of rent is just gone. It doesn't exist. Decimated by jurisdictional closures and demand reductions stemming from the recession, commercial businesses are also trying to adapt to potentially secular trend shifts. Nearly all angles of the live, work, play trend are being rethought, with the advantages of density and city living now turning into potential liabilities. Yes, that is true. We were seeing a major trend towards that work, live, play environment, specifically around metro stations in this area. I still think that will continue, but I do see there being kind of a resurgence and a move towards the suburbs, riots, closures, a more urban an area, and again, along kind of partisan lines, they're just shutting it down. So why would I live in a place where I can't work, where there's violence, where it's expensive, all that stuff? And, companies are probably rethinking that huge office downtown, big rents, to this hub and spoke model, to where they're going to have smaller satellite offices in the suburban submarkets, which would love to have them, much cheaper rents, and it would be in closer proximity to their employees' places of business, homes. So as we move to this telework thing, people still like to be in the office. I think we want to be and need to be around people. You get a little bit of cabin fever. So what you may see is, and I think you'll see, is a move towards the suburbs here. Apartment renters are rethinking the first piece of that triad as well. There is rekindled interest in suburban neighborhoods, but several other drivers for short-term and month-to-month and month-by-month renting exist. Job uncertainty, protracted work from home options, and historically low mortgage interest rates are all in play. This preference for flexibility, combined with an ongoing wave of new competing development across the DC region, places property managers in challenging positions. So this again speaks to that supply issue. They have to compete because demand is now almost non-existent. And how do you get people in? How do you get people to make a decision when they're not ready to make a decision? Really you can't. But landlords are saying, whatever we can do to get you in, let's get you in. And I wrote an article on this as well. I'll link to it in the description. And it talks, how do you lease up a space? And, a good strategy similar to this one is you allow for a shorter lease term. You do not give a tenant improvement allowance, and, basically, get it as low as possible, the rent, just to get people in. The vacancy rate drops to zero at some point. So you do that, you cover your costs in the interim, you get them to invest in the space, the tenant, by paying for the build out, and you can offset those costs by free rent, kind of what we had mentioned earlier. And then the tenant goes and improves your space. And in, let's say, 3 years, you give them a renewal right potentially, or not. But if you do give them a renewal right, it's then at the market rate. So let's say you rent for $20 just to get them in, but the market rate's 30. Okay, well, in 3 years, they've invested $40 a square foot in the space, and it just doesn't make sense for them to move economically. So they'll go ahead and rather pay that $30 per square foot because they're already in the space, they've invested in the space, and now you've got a longer term tenant. You kind of took your medicine in the short term, and you secured that tenant. So I think we'll see some more of this. I think landlords are going to continue to have to compete. We're going to see a rethinking of office space, retail, good Lord, and multifamily. And last thing I'll say with multifamily and kind of the office telework dynamic, home sales are are gangbusters right now. And that's because people are likely upgrading, or rather buying homes that have that home office. So that's going to be interesting, is to see, what that does to the housing market and, the office market. I still think people are going to want to go into the office to just be with people. We're social animals, and it's yet to be seen whether or not we're going to go with, decreased density, meaning more square feet per person. So if you took 2,000 square feet for 10 people, 200 square feet a person, maybe it's 2,500 now, and it's 250 square feet to get that social distancing, maybe giving everyone an office, a smaller office, whatever. But yet to be seen. But yes, there are deals to be had. It's not going to necessarily be in huge rent drops. It's probably going to be in concessions that really do lower your net effective rent. So best to you and all, and we'll get through this thing, and here's hoping for a better 2021.